from CBS senior correspondent, and second, the Chief Sustainability Officer, Kathleen MacLaughlin. Thank you for joining us.
Please sit down. Well, there are just two of us. We'll try to entertain and inform as well as the previous panel of 15 or whatever it was. Kathleen is here in two capacities, actually, representing Walmart, the so-called behemoth of Bentonville, world's largest grocer, and everything that's just been described to you, but also works on the sustainability side, on the foundation side of the business. Perhaps we can begin with you just outlining what it is in the area of sustainability that Walmart is trying to accomplish within its company.
Sure. We started working in 2005 on sustainability because at that point, people started to realize the incredible footprint of a food business globally. And it seems obvious today, but back in 2005, I don't know what you guys were doing back then, but in those days, even the word sustainability was kind of a new term. But the leadership team at the time started spending time with folks from Environmental Defense Fund and Conservation International and other organizations to understand more about what were the issues at that time that people could see. And so the company set out three broad goals. One, to be powered 100% by renewable energy. Second, to eliminate waste in retail operations. And then third, to provide more sustainable products. And at that point, people didn't really know what it meant. It was sort of an exploration. And then since then, we've broadened and deepened those commitments really substantially, especially in the supply chain. So we became the first retailer in the world to sign up for science-based emissions reduction targets, so not only in our own Scope 1 and 2, but also Scope 3. And we launched something called Project Gigaton, where we're trying to engage our global supply chain, so all of our suppliers, to work with us on it and take a gigaton of emissions out of our supply chain in the next 10 years. So we're part of a coalition in the United States called We're Still In, which is, despite whatever the federal government decided in the US, we are still in on climate change and really trying to accelerate emissions reduction through things like renewable energy, waste reduction, packaging, deforestation, consumer product design, sustainable agriculture. And so that's one big goal area for the company. A second is around waste reduction. So again, not only in our own operations, which is where we started, but to say end-to-end, how do we create a more circular economy? How do we make consumption truly circular and sustainable? So whether you're talking about apparel or food, fresh food, whatever the category, what can we do to reduce waste upstream in our operations and downstream? And then across supply chains more generally, working on things like deforestation, forced labor, safety, chemistry of products, what goes into products, and how do we reduce chemicals of concern. Things around food safety, whether it's in China or in Mexico or wherever we may be operating. And then importantly, transparency across all the supply chains. We're really trying to accelerate better measurement and communication of measurement at every stage of the supply chain so people have the information they need to make better choices, whether they're customers or people working in the supply chain to get at some of these issues.
What would you describe as the prime motivator? This all began, in 2006 is when
2005,
when these goals were first declared. Were you being driven by increasing consumer consciousness about these issues? When people think about corporations generally in corporate America and Walmart, the evil empire, if you will, in some perceptions of the grocery business, just so big, people don't necessarily think in terms of its main motivators being the issues that you described. So were you following or a perception of the public mood, or where did this come from?
I think it's changed over time. So I would say back in 2005, it was more a recognition of the negative externalities of a retail business and saying, well, we should address those negative externalities.
Let me define the phrase negative externality. People thought you weren't doing the right things.
Retail in general, right. So waste,
right.
Consumption, that can be wasteful. So more of those kinds of considerations. And also a realization back then as well that reducing waste and improving energy efficiency, shifting to more renewable sources could actually lower cost, which has been a real core. Can lower cost. So that was a real driver, really throughout Walmart, and I think for most retailers, remove waste, lower cost. But since then, what's happened, and I think this is really exciting for business and for society, is a recognition, not just at Walmart, but among leading companies in general, that to maximize your business value, you need to address society's biggest concerns. And that, in fact, the companies that do the best job at addressing social issues, environmental issues that are on the minds of their customers are going to maximize business value and vice versa. It's this idea of shared value. And especially today, I think people increasingly recognize you can't separate economic issues, social issues, environmental issues. They're highly intertwined. And it's really, in most cases, just a matter of time before those come to the fore. So that's really the recognition. And so now the reasons for working on sustainability, yes, cost structure, but new revenue streams, supply security. How can you ensure that you have fish to sell 5 years from now, 10 years from now? You have to take care of the stocks today. Reputational issues. Customers do increasingly care about sustainability issues. Risk management. So there are many different reasons for retailers to engage in sustainability in each of their chains, well beyond their own operations, and that's why we do it.
There's a common perception that there is a balance, that the issue of sustainability and all the good works that you're involved in are counterweighted by the issue of profitability. Does that equation still stand? Is it still a question, if you're being more environmentally conscious, are you reducing your profits?
So we think that's a false trade-off. I mean, obviously there are instances where something you might want to do on the social or environmental side has a bigger cost. But what we've been finding is if you look at things as a system and you think more about applying the same level of ingenuity and creativity and rewiring that supply chain system, you actually optimize the cost, and you're going to create more value, economic value in that system by attending to the social and environmental issues. So I'll just give a couple examples. So if you take, for example, waste reduction, that's an obvious one. We're now at about 77% of our operational waste being reduced today versus when we started, and about 82% in the US. Well, that lowers our costs. It also creates new revenue streams because people pay for what we used to consider waste streams, their product material streams, or sustainable chemistry. So a few years ago, we said, well, let's take a look at chemicals of concern. Let's work with our suppliers to take 8 of them out of products, everything from laundry detergent to toothpaste to shampoo, cosmetics. And so we worked with Environmental Defense Fund, a group called The Works in the United States, and our branded suppliers, as well as our own private brand, to get these chemicals out. We've now removed 98% of those 8 chemicals of concern across our whole assortment. And that actually results in better products for the customer, better trust, better sales, as well as in many cases reducing the cost of those products.
Well, that was the question. If you're talking detergents, for example, if you take the most harmful nitrates out of detergents, are you not having to find a more expensive way of getting clothes clean? And is that putting pressure on the supplier? Again, is the bottom line not a factor in all of these discussions?
The bottom line is definitely a factor. But what our suppliers found is that in many cases there were substitutes because sustainable chemistry has advanced. And actually the energy that we've been putting into addressing this issue creates more investment for sustainable chemistry, which creates more innovation, which creates more solutions that we can now start to apply to the next wave of chemicals. So yeah, that's been the challenge, is how do you find substitutes that are equally effective, that are also cost effective? And what's exciting to me is it's there. It takes a lot of work, and sometimes it takes a bit more time, but that's there. And as I said, it drives trust, it drives a better product, and the cost structure is just fine.
Getting into the area of carbon footprint, on one of your announced goals was to reduce the amount of carbon that the company spews. How have you done it? Talk in terms, if we can drill down a bit, in terms of the specifics. Walmart has, 5,000 stores across the U.S.? I don't know how many internationally, thousands and thousands of stores. and you're in the business of moving product, often high volume, bulk, heavy product. How have you made, and what have been the drivers, to coin a phrase, that you've used to reduce the amount of environmental damage that transport has within the company?
Yeah. So in the early days in 2005, as I said, we set out that goal of 100% renewable energy. At that point, it wasn't time bound. We just said, well, let's see what we can do. So we launched a couple specific initiatives to test how far could we go, how quickly, and we learned a lot, and that's what we've now applied to our next wave of commitments. One of them was in our own operations to try to accelerate energy efficiency and renewables, both through our own on-site generation. We're now one of the largest on-site generators in the United States, for example, through solar, but also through power purchase agreements, so large wind farms in different parts of the world, as an example. And so we're now at 26% renewable energy globally, and yeah, we've got 10,000 stores, so it's a pretty big base to operate against. We've said we want to get to 50% by 2025. And what's happened with our energy efficiency, we've also been working on refrigerants as well as renewables. We've managed to hold our emissions fairly flat the last 5 or 6 years despite growth in our business. Now, with our science-based commitment, we need to bend that curve, and we'll be reducing net emissions, absolute emissions, by about 18% by 2025 through all those kinds of initiatives. So our early progress, getting to 26% renewable, flattening out our emissions in our store chain, gave us confidence to go a lot further. Second one that we set out pretty early on was to double our fleet efficiency. So we said, okay, over a 10-year period, can we double our fleet efficiency in the US? We own our own trucks, and it's a pretty big fleet. So we did it, and we weren't sure we could do it. It was pretty tough, and it did take us 10 years. It was through things like working with Peterbilt and Cummins to redesign the engines, working to redesign the cab and the way that we load it with packages, redesigning the packages themselves, giving drivers feedback on their driving behavior and what it was doing to fuel efficiency, and then rewarding them for better behavior. And that was, gear shifting and the speed that they were traveling. So we built into the instrument panels feedback, which now, by the way, is widely available in the industry, but we were really one of the ones who drove that.
Sorry, and the driver was rewarded how? If the matrix in his particular truck
in their performance review. So drivers
showed less
that didn't
energy consumption, he got paid more.
Yes, and conversely, right? So if they were not driving in a fuel-efficient way, they got feedback on that. So we made it part of the business, and that's one of the things we've tried to do all along, make it part of the business. Whether you're a buyer, a driver, someone who works in real estate, it's really how you do your business in a better way that, as I said, we think it's going to create more economic value as well as societal value. So that was the second one that gave us confidence that we can do this. And then the third was we said, let's try to take 20 million metric tons out of our supply chain as an experiment. Can we do it? And we managed to get close to 40. And it was through a combination of the things I mentioned. It was through renewable energy that suppliers were using in their own manufacturing. We worked in China to set up a factory efficiency set of tools that factories in China can use to lower their load. And they are saving 10-15% energy, which is cost savings for them, but it also lowers emissions. Sustainable agriculture, innovating products for customers like cold water wash or CFL and now LED light bulbs and so on. So by doing those projects with suppliers, we were able to get to 20 million metric tons, actually ended up at close to 40, and that gave us the confidence to launch Project Gigaton, which obviously is a lot more, but we want to be a lot more aggressive now. We want to accelerate what we can do across the chain. And that's really the biggest message I'd have for people here today, which is, none of this can we do alone. If we're going to make meaningful progress on climate, on waste, on deforestation, forced labor, all of these issues in product chains, it really does require collaboration, public-private partnerships. So, companies like Walmart working with suppliers, other retailers working with suppliers, government agencies, multilaterals working together in collective action to rewire how these systems work. That's how we're going to get there. And technology plays a big role. I'm very excited about what technology can do in this space.
All right, sticking just briefly with the economics of it, is it a point of friction or a battle in the board of the company to convince them that they can do good at the same time as doing well?
No, not really. It's made some of our investors maybe unhappy in the short term, but again, we're thinking long term. I'll give an example, and it's actually one of the benefits of still having the founding family still pretty, big in terms of our shareholding. So about half the company is owned by a broad family, multi-generational family now, and they have a very long-term orientation. So we've done things in the past. We raised our starting wage, for example, and it dropped our stock maybe 20-30% the year that we did that. The market did not like that. But we knew it was the right thing to do. We knew it was going to translate into better retention, better associate productivity and engagement and so on, and it has. But the market didn't realize that at first. And it's taken us a couple years to gain back that value and then some. And it was actually the confidence of our board and of our major investors that allowed us to do that.
But is that the issue, that you're almost running a corporate educational facility? Are you trying to prove that things can be done in a more sustainable, more humanitarian, if you will, way, and to demonstrate at the same time that there's an economic self-interest in it? Is it a question of enlightened self-interest?
I do think that is a big challenge for all of us, and something I know many people in this room are working on, which is making that business case for sustainability, showing how technology, innovation, and other things can actually improve the economics as well as address environmental and social issues. We are seeing a big movement around long-termism in markets that is a counter to short-termism and activist investors. I think the jury's still out, the battle's still being fought, but we are certainly a voice for long-termism. And we are seeing also the rise in ESG measurement metrics, firms, socially responsible investors, trying to use as screens environmental and social factors for financial investments. And we really applaud that and encourage that. I think we've got progress to make as a community in terms of how do we measure true environmental impact and social impact to make sure those screens are right. But the fact that people are struggling with this and trying to bring that into investing is a great sign. I was just at a conference with Bloomberg in New York a couple weeks ago, and the whole thing was about that. So we had a room full of institutional investors who are trying to get better at making the right calls for their financial investments to make sure that they're also driving societal value, because they recognize that enhances business value. So I think the recognition is there, and things are moving in the right direction.
Even if it's there on the corporate level, and a lot of people would argue that the argument is not completely won, I think we would say in the markets.
And we need everybody to keep making that case.
All right. On the national level, is the environment that you're now working in particularly in the U.S., a hindrance to what you're trying to do? Are you working, this is the still in it argument. Are you trying to prove, or question, are you trying to prove these things can still be done despite an unsympathetic federal regulator?
Yeah. Well, Walmart started this journey in 2005, and we're committed to it regardless of what the particular administration, in office is. And I think that's been true for the company all along, many administrations coming and going. I do think it is a challenge, the fact that the U.S. has withdrawn from Paris, but we're part of a broader movement of companies, state governments, city governments, nonprofits to say we're still in on climate. We're still working on it. There are all the reasons in the world to work on this, and it doesn't really matter at some level what's going on, politically, because the case is strong. I think it's like anything in life. It would be nice if all of the oars were going in the same direction, but we have our boat, and we're pulling the oars with our partners, and we'll carry on.
Our 20 minutes to save the world has come to an end. The numbers have gone red. Thank you very much, Kathleen.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Please.